I grew up on a fruit farm here in Southwest Michigan, and I knew that I always wanted to go into horticulture. And I have a very basic degree, so I know the basics pretty well. And when I first got here, I noticed that not many people are working on cherry physiology. A few people on peach physiology, but not many on cherry physiology. And I just decided that one of the things that we needed to know is, from a basic point of view, does photosynthesis limit yield or not? And if we would look at that main building block, photosynthesis, we would know a lot about how much light we needed, temperature, humidity, and many of the growing factors. So a lot of the things that I've done are basic and work on that premise. But along the way, we had to learn many things. So first of all, let's take light. How much light does it take to produce a cherry? How should the light be distributed in canopies? So we first looked at thresholds for light, not only for single fruit, but within the canopies. We looked at different planting spacings, and eventually we proved that the amount of yield was directly related to the amount of light that could be absorbed absorbed by an acre of land. But along the way, we found that there were also thresholds. That means that after a certain point, yield may increase, but quality does not, and it starts to decrease. So today I talked a lot about distribution of light in canopies and how it related to both cherry and peach production, what optimum shape and spacing should be. And after that, we talked about what might be the ideal type of an orchard. Secondly, we started to look at, since we knew that what we needed as far as the amount of carbon produced to develop fruit, we wanted to find out what some damage thresholds might be, meaning at what point does damage to the leaf, either biotic or abiotic, start to affect the production. So before we can do that, we have to know what the leaf to fruit ratio should be for optimizing production. We did that and looked at that for different crops. Then beyond that, we started to look at how much damage we could have to a leaf before we compromised photosynthesis. And for most fruit leaves, you can tolerate 10% damage between leaves if you're not right at the limit of the number of leaves per fruit. If you're a little bit more, then you have some compensation that you can work with. So that's really fairly important to know. The second thing that we then looked at was timing. When does the insult on the foliage affect growth and production the most? And for almost all fruit crops, the earlier you have the insult, either be by biological or environmental, the greater the effect. So that means that if you're trying to control a certain type of insect, it's probably more important to do it earlier than later. And from a residue point of view, that's also a good point to look at. We also looked quite extensively at flooding damage. We find that because of a lot of our soils are sandy, but they're clean tilled, the drainage was not very good, and we found that sensitivity to high water table was pretty great in tart cherry. In fact, if you've got much more than four to 6 days of flooding with lack of oxygen, you can have some pretty detrimental effects, and there are a way to affect that. Along the way, we also have looked at cold hardiness. We've fingerprinted cold hardiness for 30 years for peach and cherry. And more recently, because of the earlier springs, but not a similar earliness in the last spring frost, we found that we've had a lot of problems with spring frost. So if we could delay bloom, that would be a pretty good thing. We found that the only thing that causes growth of the buds in the spring is temperature. So if we can cool the buds, we could delay them. And we developed a system by using mist and programming in the temperature and humidity to look at evaporation, that we'll be able to apply a mist to the tree, evaporative cool the bud, and delay bud break by 7 to 10 or 12 days. I think that might be economical in the future. Now, the other thing I tried to do is today was indicate some of the things that we might have learned 30 to 40 years ago that finally are applicable today. One of them would be mechanical harvest of cherries. We were at the ground floor of looking at the use of ethaphon for mechanical harvest. And recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, growers were saying, what we really want to do with some of our brine fruit is harvest the fruit with the stem on. It's worth more money to the grower, sometimes 3 to 4 times more, but how can we do that? And we looked at some of our old data, and what we found was that if we wait till the fruit is about 4.5 to 5 grams to shake, and before the fruit retention force of the lower abscission zone is so low that the fruit falls off at the bottom, we could mechanically harvest, and what would happen is we swing the fruit such that it rips off at the pedicel and the branch, and the stem stays on. So for some fruit, sweet cherries, we have a window of 3 to 7 days where we can mechanically harvest.